I want to bring back up the subject of this substance that I have mentioned to you that is in man's blood, that which I named AMV12. The reality of this has been known for thousands of years, but to save you from me looking around, this is the first time it's been named. And I haven't tried to explain it to anyone, but I named it because of certain things that I know are entailed in this. And my name of AMV12 does have some significance, but it's of no great importance to tell you literally what it is. But this has been known for thousands of years in a way that you would not expect, in a way that I believe will surprise some of you. What I could refer to as being the mainstream of life, we could call it a sociological middle class all over the world, but the mainstream of life, the average person, the ordinary person at any given time zone, at any particular place in life's body, you all know that everywhere on this planet, from some small little island in the South Pacific to people in the great northern areas of Canada, to people in the South in the United States, to people in the far west of the United States, what is normally referred to as different cultures. Each one of those cultures, as diverse as it may seem to be from its neighbor, each culture has a mainstream. And outside the mainstream, each culture has that which is non-mainstream. The AMV12 has a spread. Life's own blood has this version of AMV12. But as it comes out in human existence, the AMV12 has a spread that goes from, to keep it good and two-dimensional, it goes from being too little on this side to being too much over here. And then the mainstream, like the main current, transporting the necessary nutrients in life's blood and all of human existence is its own blood system. When the AMV12 does not fit into the mainstream, getting down now to individual levels, you have, I'm just going to pull out several examples and you can fill in the rest. You have what is referred to as, and I'm not speaking now in the strict physical sense, the strict physically observable genetic sense, comma, but such things as mental deficiency, not the kind that would be considered to be physically based by ordinary psychology or psychiatry or medicine, but that which they would refer to as being psychological. You have those that seem to be emotionally crippled, and you have those that seem to be irresistibly brought into what each culture refers to as antisocial, unacceptable, criminal behavior, that they are at continual loggerheads with the mainstream of that time zone and that locale. All of you read enough to know that throughout history there have been attempts, speculations, theories that life continues to make on small scales as to what brings this about. Again, I'm not talking about a child born with half a physical brain. We're talking about that great area that humanity has always been referring to as the psychic difficulties in man, the psychological difficulties. Those who seem to be, if you want to go back to the Grecian times, running through the streets, and they seem to be idiots. They seem to be nuts. They seem to be crazy. Maybe not even all the time. And maybe even at rest, they appear to be okay. And if medicine had reached that point back then, the kind I'm suggesting to you is they could have cut them open and found nothing wrong. So back then, of course, they believed that the gods, in some perverse way, were screwing up the people's mentality and their outlook. Then it has been refined so that it's considered to be even a different area of problems of being crippled emotionally, that you cannot seem to deal with life. You seem to continually have your heart broken, or on the other side, you are continually inflamed by being alive. That you are hostile to a point that perhaps keeps you in trouble with the prevailing forces in your culture, in your time zone. And then the out and out, let's just call it criminal behavior to cover everything that I said earlier of antisocial and etc. Now you know that there have been attempts all the way from trying to plot the bumps on people's head to find a criminal type, to attempting to look at babies, then calling in witch doctors and soothsayers, and for them to look upon children, to cast sticks, to look into their little eyes, look into their hands, and to say this child in some way is doomed, this child is cursed. There have been all those attempts from infancy to apparent physical types who are criminally inclined, all the way from all of that up until our day, to make it a horizontal spectrum, of attempting to bring these people into the mainstream, attempting to explain their behavior in economic terms, political terms. And I'm telling you what it is. There is a spread of this necessary ingredient. It is a part of the specific nutrient that keeps life growing, and it's in man's blood, it's in life's blood. And when you fall outside the mainstream, which remember, anything that's alive is going to have a triad basis. There is no such thing as the mainstream without the non-mainstream. And so you're going to always have falling to one side or the other of too little. I hate to tell you too much, but that's the only way that I can explain it very quickly. They do not fall within the mainstream of the MV12 spread. It is in the middle, in the great semi-washed bourgeoisie, the very thing that all good horizontal artists, anarchists, revolutionaries, the very ones that everybody hates, the great eternal dumbasses wearing brown shoes and white socks. Even further into the middle of the mainstream, here in the 1980s, the great yuppies, the people who seem to be absolutely locked up that I am a Republican because my father was a Republican. I drive a BMW now because everybody that's anybody drives a BMW. I quit going to such and such restaurant because everybody I know quit going. What seems to be great herds of well-dressed lemmings that have always been sitting ducks to artists, social observers, which you may be able to note and remember from your readings at least throughout history, artists, the artists that survived, the artists that kept a reputation for hundreds and thousands of years, you can see that such artists were never in the mainstream. They either wore their hair too long, too short, they had funny sexual practices, they seemed to have real hairy thighs, and they didn't believe in the Lord or the prevailing religion. They wouldn't eat the right foods, they wouldn't go to sleep when everybody else went to sleep. And part of their job seemed to be in charge of making fun of the mainstream. You people just coming into this, I'll remind you again, I am not involved in any way with the criticism of life or the artist or the mainstream. I'm pointing out to you ways that this manifests itself. It is all necessary. No one was right and no one was wrong. But what I want you to see is the sitting ducks for satire, for attack, for ridicule. I should have left attack for last and built it up from theoretical to radical. Is the middle class, in the real sense of the word, the mainstream, the spectrum that I'm telling you of the spread of MV12, its intensity in the human bloodstream, varying from person to person, and at times, believe it or not, varying from whole groups of people. Whole groups of people. Like the very ones who are ridiculed, satirized, oftentimes physically attacked, are in the mainstream of that time and that place. It is those outside the mainstream that do the ridiculing. It is that part of your blood that is the weakest, that is the most diluted, that makes you feel as though you're a social critic, that you do find fault, or that if you laughed along in a mechanical way when I was making fun of yuppies and well-dressed lemmings, if it was some mechanical laugh, then that was the weakest part of your blood, if you did it seriously. Like, yeah. It is necessary. It is necessary also that there be those who are apparently psychologically deranged, psychologically disturbed, emotionally diswrought, that it seems to be a part and parcel of their being alive. Also note, life continues within this great bosom of itself, not only to have these maladies, which you do, but like any good life, it attempts to cure itself, to at least treat itself, which you do. If nothing else, you feel like, I'm coming to pieces, I may die tomorrow, you know, at least take an aspirin, right? At least lay down and put a cold towel on your head. Within life's body is this same spread of there being apparent illnesses, because it is an apparent illness in the body of life, in the body of man, mankind, that it does appear to be an illness for people to walk around and make absolutely incongruous statements. The mainstream cannot deal with that. You cannot live at home if your mother suddenly began to speak in some strange tongue that she made up, or that everything you said to your father, he just said something that was just totally irrelevant to what seems to be the ordinary reality of the situation. Such people are put away normally. The thing is, they are attempted in life's body to be treated. They are looked at as being ill. If people seem to have too great a sway of emotions, somebody who seems to cry all the time, someone who seems to always be depressed, the family, if it gets big enough, the community, someone takes notice of this, and the feeling is, we have got to treat this person. We've got to pluck them at least out of the mainstream. If we can't treat them, we've got to put them away so that they won't disturb other people. Of course, in some times past, you may know, they also put them away in the belief that, you know, nuttiness could be contagious. You know, if I stay around my old uncle that acts this weird, hell, I might start acting that weird. Might be catching. Criminal behavior, of course, has always spoken for itself, that every society, whether it seems to be divinely inspired or not, ends up with a set of absolute laws, not suggestions, not standards of morality, but some laws that says for the interest of all of us, which they're saying the interest of the mainstream. It's like life's blood talking. If for the interest of most of us in the middle of the spectrum, like the great eternal bell curve that all of you learned to love and hate in college, right there at the heart of the bell curve is where this information comes from. It's where the voice comes from in life's blood that says, this is the acceptable behavior here, and outside this, we can't tolerate. We cannot have people pushing each other around. We cannot have people taking away the belongings of other people who spent part of their life, that is their effort to work, to make this. They went and found it, they dug it up. Other people can't come and take it away from them, no matter how big you are. You can't do that, it's going to tear us apart. That is the middle of the MV12 spread in life's blood talking. Now you're missing something if you think this is too obvious. It is not the fringes talking. Those involved in criminal behavior are not out picketing the state capitals or writing their legislators proclaiming their support of more stringent laws. They do not go on talk shows screaming about the ungodly behavior of many people. They do not write letters to their paper saying our civilization is falling apart because of the criminal element. But you're going to miss it if you say, well, yeah, that's obvious because they are the criminal element. Yes, it's obvious. But shadows are obvious. There's a reality behind it. They are not the ones apparently being hurt. There have been continuing attempts to treat this condition. Life is attempting to treat the spread of the MV12. It is as though it is trying to make the bell curve the only curve. And instead of it being that, it would be a quantized hut, that all my blood would be enriched, that all my little molecules, knee humans, would be mystically awakened, enlightened, that every little human molecule I have would be as evolved as the best one I have. That should not strike you as strange, because what else are you doing? You in the partnership arguing over all these little small minor details perhaps that I have that keep me apparently just eternally, always just this far from perfection. Just all these, I clean up one little thing and then something else. Somebody says, and I go, yeah, you're right. Or I'm sitting alone thinking how wonderful I am, and suddenly the partnership says, vanity, vanity, vanity. And you realize, no, I'm not. It is as though life is attempting to take this MV12 spread all the way from the diluted sides, the unbalanced sides on the edge of a bell curve, and to bring it all into the mainstream. That is, to make all of its blood as enriched throughout its system as it is in the mainstream, in some parts of its system. To do that, they have not only, it has not only made humanity get involved with putting people away, taking them out of the mainstream, locking them up, punishing them even, not just for criminal behavior, but for acting weird. I assume all of you know that. Those who used to be diagnosed as being insane, there have been times in history, Western history, for those of you who think the Western world's it, where they took people that they said, this man is weird. They'd say, well, take him downstairs and beat the piss out of him. It was worth a try. You know, plus, if you beat a man long enough, he will quit being weird and upsetting the children and the horses out in the street, and his neighbors will no longer complain. A variation of that, of course, hate to go back and pick on our great example, but how about the good old Big C church? Not only people being weird, people being ungodly, people being non-Catholic. Well, it's a simple cure. Take the sucker downstairs and beat the piss out of him. And it was surprising how many people, after a small beating, went, I see the light. And I have pointed out in the past, Muhammad had it down to a fine art, because he was sort of peripatetic at the time. He didn't stop, he just grabbed somebody and you got a knife at your throat. They didn't drag it out and beat you, you just had, right now, do you believe? And you got your choice. And a lot of people went, yes, I do. Now that I never thought of that, but I do. All right, besides all of that, I was getting into, that's just a comma after that, all that seems to be very direct physical means. But now, I ask you this question in my great secret rhetorical way to get you to participate sometime back, about what might be the possible uses of prayer. Why did life come up with this notion of prayer and stick it in man? Can anybody see that one of the purposes, the attempted purposes of prayer, is an attempt to cure an MV12 in balance. Or if you want to look at it a more positive way, to try and enrich the blood of those apparently praying. And within praying, you can include chanting, apparently, but not just apparently, but those who believe that they're sitting and meditating on some great picture, some great holy cosmic word, some supernatural impression, that they're going to sit and try and turn their attention, their consciousness on that, and only that until such time that it takes over their consciousness. Throughout history now, whether we're talking about Western churches putting up with the notion of mysticism or not, whether it be that or into more Eastern areas, it still has always been described as being a religious experience when something did seem to happen, when there did seem to be a real change in some person. I am telling you what the change was. It's not to take away from it, but rather than you people live the rest of your lives believing in all sorts of ghosts and goblins, and for those of you who just came here and picking up these tapes in the last several years, you might go back and find some of the things I wrote, if you're still interested, that I went through a small process historically with a group of people I started with, wherein at first I apparently was describing things in a psychological sense. Not really very spiritual, but more in a psychological sense, that all of this was unique, that all of this was almost separate from man. And I went through that pretty fast trying to drag people on, and I realized it was not totally that necessary any longer with a small group of people, few people I found. And so I have simply taken it into what, compared to spiritual / psychological descriptions, I have taken it now into specific physical descriptions. Simply to show you, not that I am right and everybody else was wrong, but to show you that the consciousness of life has expanded to such a point that not only me, but some of you can now see that that which used to be called spiritual and psychological is physical. There is no dichotomy. There is no argument. And it's not to take away from it. If it was to take away from it, it would not be progress. It would not be an evolution. If it was to take away from it, as soon as I realized it, I would abandon it, I guess. But that which passes for being spiritual and psychological is physical, and I'm giving you one place that is specifically based. In the blood, and the blood in different people is different. One other thing I've mentioned 1.5 times over the last year and a half, I keep waiting for somebody to take it and jump off a cliff with it. You have to move out of 2 dimensions. The curious thing is, if I am telling you the truth, which I am, why can't we take someone's blood and tell the difference between somebody over here, somebody who evidently understands more about the reality of life, and then just an average old fucker? And I told you that if you go send the blood off and they look at it and examine it and do everything they can, they will not find any specific difference that would fit into what I'm telling you. Or, put another way, they would never find a substance that I have named MV12. They'll never find it. But you've got to go into another dimension, because the thing is everyone who looks for it doesn't have the sufficient amount, and they can't see it. It's not a breakdown of technology, it's a breakdown of consciousness, or it's not a limit of technology. It's not that they don't have the right test. It's not that they don't have the right microscopes. It's the consciousness of the people looking. And you can't see beyond your own level. It is there, and they can't see it. It is there, and it has been called by every name that covers the full gambit of human experience. It's been called being religious. It's being called more religious. It's been called being non-religious. It's been called being a heathen, an atheist, a non-believer. It's been called being a decent person. It's been called being a questionable person. It's been called being an outsider in life. And it's in the blood. By attempting to do this, you are attempting to enrich the blood. It is not just a one or something else approach, because you cannot do this unless you have a particular basic wiring pattern already. It all fits way beyond the world of 2 and 3D. That you would not have the desire to enrich the blood if you did not have the possibility to do it. And of course, if you didn't have the possibility to do it, you wouldn't have the desire to do it. There has to be a kind of brain set, physically, already in place to undertake this. But all of the ideas that humanity's already had, that the gods are going to talk to them, a mystical experience, they are talking, among other things. I could describe it other ways, and I have. But I'm taking you to a point that is very physical. The chemistry of the blood is altered at these times that have been called, just take ordinary experience in the past, those who have written and talked about it, of having an experience of consciousness that was not only indescribable, but altered their life. All the way from that to the little ones of people saying, God talks to me at times. Now that can fall in the fringes of the bell curve. And those that have God talking to them, they may either have a church or they can have a gun in their hand at a 7-Eleven store. They're not that far removed. But those who apparently do no great harm, which includes everything from our viewpoint, from ordinary ministers and priests and rabbis to hold-up men, but those who seem to have personally benefited and then done no particular harm, that is, holding up life's expansion, via their proclaimed conversations with God, I'll tell you what it is. Their blood is thickening. And it comes out as unusual, they call it voices, but all of you should have some of this put together by now through your own observation, through some of the tasks I've given. Your consciousness changes. This apparent partnership wherein you, and apparently somebody else inside you, carries on this dialogue, this argument. The AMV12 balance changes in someone's blood. WDNA changes this broadcast schedule. It doesn't have to be dramatic, but I assure you, when that happens, you're aware that that station has been playing a pretty strict top 40 list, and now they're playing stuff that they would have never played in the past. They're playing stuff I never heard internally. Oh, I knew those kind of songs were around, but now my station is playing it. You're talking about a change in the balance of the AMV12. Life is continually attempting to change the balance, to enrich all parts of his blood. Now let's jump far afield. And then jump back. Over the last several years, at least, either through me or through Kairoot, everyone that's been exposed to this has heard some variation of this, quote, there is no truth in words. Me or Kairoot 1 said it just point blank. So, and many of you have picked up on it and written notes and expanded the idea, not incorrectly so, that there is a quite valid reality to that. But let us now unfold the map further. There is no truth in words, yet there is all truth in words. But in the latter case, the truth has to do with the words themselves and the person who spoke them. That is what is completely different from an idea that there is truth in words, wherein I could correctly point out to those involved with this, there is no truth in words. If there was, all this would be simple. All this would be very simple. There is no truth in words, yet there is all truth in words, but in the latter case, the truth is in the words themselves. Not the fact that they're supposedly a stand-in for reality, for experience, for a full dimension of what one might observe or experience. The words are saying what the words are, and the words are also saying what the person is who spoke the words. They're saying what their wiring system is. They're saying what the balance of AMV12 in their blood is. They're saying whether they're in the mainstream of life or whether they're on the fringes, where they live out at the edges of the map. That is, once you have some personal perception of the fact that there is no truth in words, which let's assume almost all of you do by now. Some of you have even gone a little, or let it go on a little too far probably, that you in the partnership can now many times listen to someone become verbose and go, to hear someone apparently talking great psychological, weighty matters and think, you know, it's garbage. It's just words. The man has no idea what he's saying. But he does have some idea of what he's saying in this, that the words he's saying reveals what he is. It reveals where he is in life's bloodstream. It reveals how he is wired up for a man or a woman to say, I am here in response to such and such social circumstance. I'm here in response to a growing number of our political leaders who say such and such. I am here in response to that to tell you this. That is, to give you my opinion. My credentials are such and such and such and such. Now, let me respond to what's going on. Right, in the mainstream of life, in the ordinary flows of human events, that person is not going to tell you any more about what's going on than those that he is attempting to counteract, those that he is attempting to criticize. Back to the original statement of there is no truth in words, on that basis, none of the confrontational aspects of life, there being someone here and always having a foe, apparently two-legged stool, the apparent continuing necessity, there be opposition to everything to keep it alive. Within that context, as far as trying to find, quote, the truth, some great truth with a capital T, the very things that brought you people into such activity as this, you should know. Without getting the blues, without being upset at all, you should know, forget it. Which is the other side or the edge of the coin of forget looking for a magic book. Forget looking for the magic cave. Forget looking for the great magic person who is secretly running the whole world. In that sense, there is no truth in words, the truth you start out looking for. But it is not a waste of time. What is going on in ordinary life is not a salami sandwich laid out in the sun. It's something. And there is all truth in words. All the way from the fringes, those at the edge of the map. You've got less to gain from them than you do the mainstream, but you can learn something. You've got to learn something. You've got to learn something on the basis that if you're wired up to believe that those who are criminally inclined, who are criminally active, as compared, based upon the standards of our middle stream here, to believe that these people are in some way demon-possessed, to believe that these people are economically suppressed, to believe that something is wrong and that it has nothing to do with me. All I can do is give some money to them. You are wrong. To belong in this, there is a piece of you wired up that you can feel somewhere. You may also be wired up that you in the partnership have always denied it. And you tried to dress like a holdover from the hippies and you claim that you loved everybody. But if you belong here, there is a piece of a mad dog killer in you. Not that you'll go out and do it, But to say that that is absolutely foreign to you, that you are such a, I don't know, seems to be that you were just a naturally born, kind of godly inclined little boy or girl. And that harsh treatment, one person to another, is just, it's beyond me. Just, I don't know how the gods went awry. Well, your radio station is turned up either real loud or you don't belong here, because there's a piece of you somewhere that matches that. It's no big deal. It's not something that you got to work on the rest of your life. You don't even have to work on it past 10 or 11 o'clock tonight if you saw it. But all the way from that extreme, to have to use two-dimensional descriptions again, all the way to the extreme of I could just lay down and roll in glass to help my fellow man. I wish the whole world would come along and cough and spit on me, because I know then the Lord would bless me, because it would show that I'm humble. To take that as being one possible extreme. You can laugh at that, or you can feel as though, yeah, I had a piece of that. You have got to realize that you can learn something from the far extremes of this bell curve, outside the mainstream of life's MV12, the very thing that enriches it and makes it grow. The sides are necessary. The fringes are necessary. You can learn from that. There is a, quantitatively speaking, a greater area to learn from in the mainstream, where most of the activity is going on, even in the lateral world, and it's also where the mainstream of life speaks and tries to deal with the fringes. Every time someone speaks, it's as though the concentration, the balance of MV12 in life's blood spurted out a small message through the walls of its circulatory system. It's as though each human voice, each human mouth is a small pinhole, and it's continuing to spurt out little droplets of blood, and it comes out as words. And you can hear where the mainstream is. If it was of any importance, you can begin to predict the fairly distant future, because life is talking. Life continues to describe through human words, among other things, but through human words, where the mainstream of its blood is beginning to move. In what areas is the mainstream of its blood beginning to enrich itself? That which seems to be an area becoming of some importance, but at times life can announce that something's about to become important, and you can hear it in a certain way that, yes, got all the trappings. And I give this 2 months. And life beats on drums and banners come up, and suddenly the middle class, the yuppies, everybody's doing it. It's the thing to do, and as soon as it starts, first time you hear about it, I assure you, at times you can hear 2 months. What else is new? How many times has this happened to you? I got a brand new hobby. I got a brand new baby. I got a brand new something to do. I have just realized I've got one great interest in life, and I'm going back and pursue it. But at other times, it may not be going under a faddish heading, you can begin to feel, you can begin to hear, you can begin to smell, you simply experience that life is beginning to enrich itself in this way. This, at least in one area, is where life is going. In that sense, not just on a large scale, but then in that sense, back to individual people, there is all truth in words, because the words forget that they're representing something else. Take the words as representing themselves, are saying what the words represent to the person saying them. They're saying what that area of life's bloodstream makes of those words that are supposedly a reflection of something else. You do not, once you can do this, you do not need to go to seances, read weird books, try and think weird thoughts. If any of you have any problem thinking weird thoughts, all you got to do is go hang out on a street corner, sit in a park bench. For those of you more laid back, stay home and turn on the television, turn on talk radio, open the window and stick your ear out. You can hear anything you need to hear. But you've got to be able to remember that there is no truth in words, comma, yet there is all truth in words. But in the latter case, the truth is in reference to the words themselves, nothing else, the words themselves and the person who spoke them. Do you get any glimmer of the fact that if you could do what I'm describing in words, then you would not get captured by what people say, whereas you are captured now. Everyone is captured. You know that. If you're back to your ordinary self, you're captured, because all somebody's got to do is say, "You dumb son of a fucking bitch." Or someone says, "Oh, is it you again? I think about you so often. You mean so much to me." Or, if that's too dramatic, how about a good old no? You fill in the first part. Daddy, Mommy, God, life, can I have? No. It is a part of the dynamics, it is a part of the moving of energy in life system that words do have this effect. All your life, right now. Somebody comes in and says, "Melvin, I'm moving out. Taking the kids in the Corvette." Nothing's happened yet. It's just the words, though. Well, you could be at a movie, and it's suddenly seen, and the woman walks in, and she says, "Melvin, I'm taking the kids in the car." And suddenly, your little heart of hearts, you have this feeling, this could happen to me. My old lady may be waiting at home right now. That may be the next thing. It's just like, it's almost happened to me. You surely hear what I'm saying about me dragging this into any further extremes. Words have that power. We're not talking about the reality of it yet. That is, she says, "Melvin, I'm leaving." She hadn't left yet. She's staying there saying it. But the words are telling the truth about themselves. She's intending to convey something. She's intending to have an effect. She hadn't left. Or what does no mean? When you ask your mother, when you ask somebody now for something, they say no. It's as though they don't have to act. They can just stand there. They don't have to do anything to say no. Can I do so-and-so? No. And it has an effect. Maybe you went to your room and cried. Maybe you're still crying over it. Maybe you still blame somebody that told you one day, no. Was that an act? I don't mean a pretension. Was that an act? Somebody saying no, like your mother. Can I do so-and-so? No. And you go off and you cry. You suffer. You're affected. And she's standing there. She hadn't moved. In a sense, you could say that no did not turn into any kind of active reality, but it's as real as anything else. It was as real as she'd kicked you in the ass. The words say something about themselves, but no one notices. But what if what I'm describing to you, that you could see that? Oh, hell, most of you can see it. But if you could remember it, if your blood was enriched to the point, if you could get it to these unused areas up here in the nervous system, where what people said to you was one thing, then how the partnership wanted to act was something altogether different. And if you could remember it, you could do it. Because if you could remember it, you would have altered the structure of your own blood. Your system would have already undergone a permanent alteration to be able to remember it. But then someone who says, "Get fucked," someone who says, "I love you, I like you, I've always agreed with everything you say," you are a mind among minds. Whatever was said represents a reality, but it's the reality of the words and the reality of the person who spoke the words. Nothing else. Nothing of any consequence to someone doing this. Then do you see, between any cracks of some of the great stories, the ancient stories about supposedly mystical demigods, men of some superior spiritual condition, supposedly, the way in which they reacted. Some of these weird stories that have hung on for thousands of years, how they seem to have reacted to a verbal assault. Not the old assault of the physical nature of being strung up and run out of town, but think of all the stories, supposedly of spiritual supermen or demigods, wherein the person was apparently confronted with a verbal assault, an attack, an inquiry into what the hell you're doing, and why don't you stop it, or explain what you're doing so we know whether you should stop it. And then, if you listen to it a certain way, it's as though the hero suddenly shifts the conversation. And the people continue to talk as they were talking, and he starts talking on some other level, going off at some other angle. Well, I'm going to leave that to you to fill in the blanks, because you can use it on yourself. But there are two ways in which you can deal with the matter of whether there are truth in words. It's to remember that there is no truth in words, yet there is all truth in words, but in the latter case you have got to be able to remember that the words are speaking in reference to themselves and in reference to those persons speaking the words. And it's two entirely different matters. And it's only in the latter case that a few people can see the limits of what words are. Let's change it entirely. I must like that since I keep saying it. It started out being a hint for me to apparently change subjects, and then for at least a few people to realize somewhere within the next hour or so there is a kind of unnoted roundup, a rodeo punchline. All right, change the subject. I don't know what that meant anyway. I'll revert to my Baptist background, or as a Catholic, of doing sermons on the basis of last week I heard or saw such and such happen. All right. Last week, I was in a grocery store and I happened to be over at the health food, that's it, the health food section. And there were two people. There was a man and a woman. That's it. There was a man and a woman in the health food section. And the man was picking up cans and he was showing it to her, and she kept saying things about, no, I'll put that back. And I'd hear her say things like, that has raw eggs in it, that has whole eggs in it, that has white sugar in it. And he'd pick up some of that. She says, no, that's deep fried in animal fat. And he finally, he kept putting stuff back. And finally he said, well, good grief, what can we eat? It seems like, there's always something. He was showing surprise, like whatever he picked up he thought was some good health food. And she said, no, that has such and such. And he looked kind of perplexed, like a little child, like men are oftentimes do in the face of the logic of women. And he looked kind of strange, and she then looked at him, and she said, he said, well, you mean there's something in here too, and something in this one? She went, yeah, yeah. And she says, dear, there's something in everything. I'm glad I finally worked it out before I could get that in. Something like that almost did occur. All right, the point in that story of those people was that, got to jump back and forth right quick. It was like, in his case, in their collective cases, perhaps, he was trying to find something that met a criteria. I was using health food as being some class of people, some area within the spectrum of life's AMV12 blood balance that are attempting to strictly follow certain dietary pursuits. And so there he is, and he keeps thinking, how about this, how about this? And the other person keeps saying, no, this has such and such, this has such and such. The outcome being that there is something, in the two-dimensional example, they consider it to be a negative something, but that there is something in everything. In that example, she was telling the truth. Don't make me try to think up some really extreme example that would fit every health food fanatic's standards, but almost anything that you could think of that would fall into the mainstream of the fringe, where people take that seriously, everything that they could say we can't have, you know, what would it leave you with? Suck on air? Chew on bark? But then if you did that, somebody began to package bark, and then there'd be some kind of chemicals come off the packaging. In other words, as I've told you before, there is no ambrosia. There is no food of the gods. And there is something in everything. Words would have it otherwise. Words in the first case, remember where I said that there is no truth in words. Words have it otherwise, that there is a purity available. In times really past, if you recall from your college days, supposedly the Greeks, and I think even the Romans, actually believed, so it said, in the existence of ambrosia. There was some food that the gods ate. And some of them even tried to finagle and contrive some way to get some of it, because it was supposed to be the kind of food that made the gods, at least in part, be the gods. And if we could get hold of some of this stuff, but what they were inferring, what life was talking about to itself through man, would be something that didn't have something in it. A purity, a food that had no internal foe, a food that was not in any way opposed to itself. And therefore, if we ate it, we'd be like that. Then you go from that into what would have apparently in the Middle Ages of human existence and up until today into more allegorical realms of we should be pure. If we could live by the Ten Commandments, or if we could live by these 4,267 dictates of the Baptist Church, if I could live, I'm talking about a real kosher life, I'm talking about really what they're saying. They're saying that I'd finally pick up something and somebody couldn't turn to me, even my partner, and point out quite correctly, there's something in everything. What seems to be the motivating factor behind people trying to be religious is to do what? Is to in some way purify themselves so that no one, including the internal partnership, can say, hey, whatever you come up with, there's always something in everything. When you cut out one thing, you get rid of the white sugar, you get rid of the eggs, you get rid of the dairy products. Then what happens? You get down at the very bottom, and there's this weird-looking word, and it's some kind of preservative. And then you find something that doesn't have the preservative, and it has a damn egg yolk in it. It comes out in human experience and in human theory, it comes out as what apparently is a drive for a kind of purity. What cannot be explained correctly in words is what the purity consists of, because it changes from locale to locale, and it changes, as it should, from one time zone to another. It can change in one locale at different times. But if you think this is strange, how many of you have tried to live some kind of dietary strict existence of either being kosher or trying to follow some New Age diet? And it seems good at times to try and do it. Maybe you felt good when you could turn away stuff, and then what happened? Every 2 weeks you get home, and what is it? There's chocolate ice cream hidden under the bed. There is no difference between that and what life is attempting to do, apparently. But try and expand your perception of the possibilities of what life behind the two-dimensional existence of us is trying to do by having people believe that there is a perceivable, a knowable purity. Whether they know it right now or not, they'll find it, or it's in a book, or they'll know it when they taste it, that there is a purity available, and we should be striving for it through religious means, political means, economic, social means. But I'm going to have to tell you, you should be able to see it. That woman in the grocery store told the truth. There is something in everything. And yet what is going on for life to insist through man that there should be a purity possible, a purity of action, a purity of thought, a purity of my whole existence, wherein no one can point to the label on me and conclude by saying, I told you, there's something in everything. And you look, and sure enough, there's white sugar in your pocket, there's an egg down the cuff of your pants, shellfish in your shoes, lustful thoughts in your breast pocket, or perhaps in lower regions. But now on a completely different matter. Back to continuing questions and apparent interest that people have of, is there any reality in learning how to chant? Is there any reality in going and taking up some so-called spiritual practice that's been around for thousands of years, or else something that seems to be a variation of it? You have got to learn how to properly scoff at all dead book ideas. Not theoretically, but you have got to see. Not just pick out scoff because I like the sound of the word. It'll probably irritate some people, or it sounds too harsh. But you have got to learn how to properly scoff. It's not theory and you don't learn it, but that's all that dead book ideas deserve. I don't care what the dead book is. I don't care whether it came from your forefathers' religion and culture or the enemies of your forefather. When it gets down to individual practices that people still want to ask me about, sometimes, if there was something valid to something, like all the many breathing exercises and methods that I'm sure you people have read about, stretching from the eastern part of time zones of this planet up until attempted variations of it in our time zones. If there was at any time a valid practice of trying to alter one's breathing, that is breathing exercises of some kind, while chanting, while sitting, while staying on one's head, whatever. If it was ever of any practical use, it is no longer so. And the only way that you could ever get your hand back on it, to some degree, would be some living source that now understood what was involved. Maybe I should hasten to point out to you that the latter situation is almost non-existent. What you find is everyone in the mainstream of life's apparent mystical activities, that they are involved with dead book ideas. Not their own understanding of it. It is another way in which to look at what I point out of the absolute need. At times I present it to you as a question for you to neuralize. Why is it that everyone must have an external reference? When you're dealing with dead book ideas, you know, it's like you're attempting to take dancing lessons from a corpse. It serves a fringe purpose. It does not feed life's main stream. It does not enrich life's blood. It is why the very things that people seem to be attracted to, that many of you were attracted to before you met me, the so-called cults of the world, not just right now, not just here in the United States, in India, 6,000 years ago, in China, 5,000 years ago. All the many ideas of being able to tell the future from looking into tea leaves, attempting to whirl around till you throw up, and then the dead folks will come back and talk to you. Attempting to sit in one place and to stare at your little fingernail until you just get confused and you can't tell whether your little fingernail is the sun, whether the sun is your navel, whether your little fingernail is the whole universe. They are always defined as being cults outside the mainstream, crackpot religion, but notice the justice, the beauty of how everything's arranged, those whose blood structure and balance is such that end up there, to them, that's just additional proof that we're on the right track. The middle class hates us. The established religion calls us cults. Conventional wisdom says we're crackpots. What further proof do we need that we're crackpots and on the fringe? What further proof do we need that we're outside the mainstream? I'm not saying this, I'm just stopping here for a second on this whole area. I'm not saying this to attack anybody, to tell you that such activities are a waste of time, because they're not, or they wouldn't be here. Life would dispose of them. But you need to be able to see that they do not directly contribute to the enrichment of life's blood. That's why they are cults. But notice how easy it is to turn right back around, as I apparently do at times, and make a joke at the Catholic Church's expense, torturing people. All the many things that they seem to do, to go out and take people in different time zones, different cultures, and come in there and say, we're here to help you. We're your friends, and we don't any longer beat the piss out of people. As a matter of fact, we're here to help you. Give up the religions of your gods, your forefathers, put some clothes on those naked bosoms, come to church, come help us build a church, and give us part of your kumquat crop. From one viewpoint, you can go, Jesus, give the world a break. Leave the people alone. You got over there and you gave them several things. You made them worry about money, you put clothes on them, and you gave half the tribe the clap. But that is not the proper view. That is not what's taking place. The mainstream continues to enrich itself. This is not an either-or situation. With life, it's always win-win situation. But to put it back on two-dimensional level right quick, at least you missed generally where I was pointing, the mainstream, priests, rabbis, whoever goes out to evangelize, being a typical ugly American, Bermuda shorts and black socks up their knees, the IQ of a slop bucket, the perception of life of a gnat, them going out to some strange culture, minding their own business, to go in there and just turn them upside down, on a two-dimensional basis, they're enriching life's blood more than the most exotic, the most laid back, the most attractive guru going right now. Be he or she in Cadillacs, Rolls Royces, Learjets, just a small group of people. Nothing like the great evangelical groups of people out trying to change the world. But the very ones from one viewpoint that you might think would be doing a little better, left to a two-dimensional game, two-dimensional description, you'd be incorrect. Of course, then somebody here might ponder off to yourself, where does this fit? And I'm sorry, but we're running late tonight. I don't care to go into it. Something of a perhaps more practical thrust. A few weeks back I was talking, mentioning at least en passant, if not specifically, about the need for a kind of tolerance, a kind of kindness that's got to be enforced between people who might find themselves together attempting such as this. And I have mentioned other times where you've got to give up the kinds of wired up struggles, kinds of tension between you and your parents, whoever raised you. Let's consider the topic of this paragraph quote, the other side of kindness. Also, what I've said in the last few weeks, I brought mentioning about relationships of people inside the group, of being that great unrewarded tenant farmer on this blues farm, the breakups of relationships, all of that. I was speaking more in those times of telling you that it's understandable of people feeling as though their little heart's been crushed, of being disappointed, having the blues, the need to treat each other with a kind of non-lateral kindness, not through some sham behavior simply based upon a theory that everyone should love everyone else and everyone should hug each other, simply on the basis that you cannot be involved with the ordinary tensions between one another here that holds the rest of life together, because they will strangle you, it will stop everything. But somewhat on the other side of that, always having to bring up a kind of balance, even if I take months to do it, I must point out that there is no one involved with this. Now forget the rest of life, but this is the mystical, strange way this happens, and I am fully aware of it. No one seriously, properly involved with such activity as I am doing. Nobody is a priceless, fragile piece of china. There are those of you who think you are. Your blood is so weak that you grew up with a particular balance you have. You just never perhaps put it in these words. But you believe that you are a very fragile, almost priceless piece of china. As opposed to that, might I point out to you that what you should develop into is a crock pot. When I said that, I had in mind those I've seen advertised out in stores that apparently you could pick up and within reason drop them on the kitchen floor and they simply bounce and roll off. The kind, from what little involvement I have with the culinary arts, I believe that you stick food in and you can turn it on and let it simmer for 2.5 weeks and come back and there it sits whistling, and you can kick it off the, bounce, roll down the floor, and you plug it back in. But if such kitchen utensils had feelings, then the crock pot's got as have much feelings as the priceless, fragile piece of china. But if you belong here, you are not a priceless, fragile piece of china. You may think you are, but you is wrong. Or else you is wrong by being here. Because you will not survive being a fragile, priceless piece of china. It's too noisy here. It's too rough. It's too rough everywhere, but here you see how rough it is. If you don't ever see it, you just keep imagining that people are inclined to mishandle you. You just believe that life at times, because of evil forces at work, tend to bump against the cabinet and perhaps shake you loose, knock you off a shelf, or someone might be watching you and their little hand slip. That's back to Dreamville. Since I mentioned that, let me conclude by mentioning something I guess is strange enough for a conclusion. See how far removed present reality is from imaginary, erstwhile historical, two-dimensional, midstream, religious attitudes. I'm going to do this fast, but I mean it, and I'm not really going to try to explain it much, because some of you are very far away from it. And I don't say that to make you feel bad, because you can be far away from something and understand it and not be the end of it. That you can cover the distance. But many of you and much of life, but many of you fit right into what I was going to say, and that is, it will happen, the right kind of shift in your system, but to put it in words, I'll do it this way. You have got to develop a kind of very specific respect for non-animates. It's not just the religions, it's not just the mainstreams of life talking about the kind of respect that you should have for your fellow creature. But the non-animates are a part of life's body. A styrofoam cup, a magazine that you got through reading, today's newspaper, all the stuff that seems absolutely dispensable. The end of a carpet that you cut off when you got through laying it. Those of you who know anything about this and me by now, you know that I'm not about to come up and tell you of some special secret ritual to do with every styrofoam cup or every empty soda can you throw out. I'm telling you this, and it's serious. The time will come, and you might as well, that's why I'm putting it in the form of saying you should, that you should have a kind of very specific respect for everything. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly what you should do about throwing away a cup or a magazine. I'm not going to tell you that there is any particular standard. But notice, no one gives any thought to that. You're not wired up to do that. I mean, it's enough, look how little, taking an ordinary viewpoint, one quite ordinary viewpoint, look how little respect, how little regard most people give each other. Look how little regard most people give their fellow creatures on this planet. Animals, insects, trees and bushes, weeds. So, who's ever heard of having any respect for a cup? Or yesterday's newspaper? Rather than try and hint any more on that side, I'll conclude it by seeing if you can look at the other way. You are specifically cutting down on a possibility, almost hurting yourself by being totally unaware that this is part of life's body, that the can you're about to throw away, which is the only proper thing, let's say, to do with it, is to throw it away, but to be totally, continually unaware that that is part of life's body. I don't care if men apparently made it out of oil byproducts. It is a part of life's body, and by treating parts of life's body as a being of no consequence is a mistake. Is that far enough outside the mainstream? It is a mistake to be continually unaware of what seems to be the non-animates, of just taking trash, just taking garbage, taking that which has no feeling, which cannot move, and it's as though it didn't exist, or it's as though it's what it seems to be, garbage. There's more than that. There's more than that. I have a new game. My intention, as well as my intentions ever go, is for this not to be the last time. Whilst doing things to pump blood to the brain today, such as running, I did not have a moment of epiphany for a mystical name for this. The best one that came to me was bombs away. And I say, why not? And here's the game. Here's the task. As I give you part of a sayings, and I leave out one word. I have one word in mind. I have one reality in mind behind one word. But that is not necessarily the limits. Because if you get high enough, and you're the bombardier in a plane, and you say bombs away, there's no telling what you might hit. So here it is. I want everyone to pursue this. You can mail it to me. You can hand it in if you want to. If nothing seems to strike you, don't fake it. If nothing strikes you in the next week, maybe it'll come back to you later. And as I said, perhaps I'll continue this game at some other time. But up until now, I like it, since we haven't done it, so I like it thus far. It's a task I was going to make the whole statement and then tell you people to neuralize it yourself, to pursue it and see what you came to. But there's something about getting around the 9th or 10th mile in 110-degree weather. Some of you know it. By all reports I've read, it brings the percentage of blood in your brain down somewhere like 7 or 8%. That's when you let your kidneys do the thinking. Back to the subject. Here it is. I'm going to give you a statement, and I'm going to leave out one word. If you get my word, you might get a prize. That is, you might go boom and see the bomb hit and go, hey, but you might hit something else nearby. You might hit something that I might even say, well, I didn't even notice that that was there, whether I was saying the truth or not. Or I might say, I only had this one target in mind and the surrounding targets, and you hit something 4 or 5 blocks away, but if you hit it, you'll know it. Here it is. Murder is to insults as blank is to self-confession. Murder is to insults as blank is to self-confession. Bombs away.